Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, folks. How are you doing? It's Danny Tisdale, and it is the Danny Tisdale Show. Well, you know that because that's why you hooked up with us today. And today we do as we usually do, and that is to welcome another leader, legend, and trailblazer as we celebrate Harlem, the greatest community in the world. And what's special today is that we have a guest host that's hosting the show with me, and that is Glenn Hunter, who is co-founder and co-executive director of Doing real good, Danny. Harlem Cultural Archives. Harlem Cultural Archives is a 501c3 organization founded in 2008 for the purpose of gathering important oral history from the Harlem community. And as Glenn mentioned to me earlier, it's an archive, right, Glenn?
That's correct, Danny. That's correct.
Okay, at least I got that.
Of interviews, yes. It's a repository of oral history interviews. That's correct.
Yes, all history interviews, and not in its Harlem Cultural Archives, not human cultural archives, Danny. I'm just saying that for myself, Glenn. Well, and Glenn, thank you for being with me during this conversation, and let me introduce our guest. She was born and raised in New York City. She is a leader, legend, and trailblazer. I don't say that with any hesitation, and that's Rudean. I'm going to destroy her last name.
Leinaeng.
Leinaeng. Get it right. I'm having trouble. I'm working, but my tongue isn't. And she's with us. She's received a BA degree in chemistry from Hunter College and MS from New York University. She's a professor at Bronx Community College, where she taught for 30 years before retiring. During the 1970s, she lived in Tanzania for 2 years with her sons, Lau and Thomas. After participating in the struggle for a free South Africa during the 1980s as a member of the Women for Racial and Economic Equality, she and her husband, an African National Congress activist, took up residence in South Africa. In 2002, she co-produced the acclaimed documentary 12 Disciples of Nelson Mandela with her son Thomas Allen Harris, who produced and directed it. The film centers on her husband and his young comrades, who in 1960s were the first group to leave and go into exile. In 2012, she was inducted into the Hunter College Hall of Fame for her activism and leadership. And on the website, tulipbudpress.com, she states that a few years ago, she joined the Frederick Douglass Creative Arts Writers Group, led by renowned author and Harlem Writers Guild. I had to give Harlem Writers Guild a plug here. Harlem Writers Guild is the oldest organization of African-American writers in the world. She was inspired by Grace Edwards, who taught the Frederick Douglass Arts Group, and thus began her journey, which culminated in the writing of her novel that we're going to talk about now, Cold War and Love. Okay, after I've destroyed everyone's name and left out a few things, it's great, Miss Rudean, to have you here with us today. How are you?
I'm fine. It's wonderful to be here.
And it's so glad to have you here with us, and I'm ready to get right into it. I was curious. I know Glenn has read the book, but who is the reader you have in mind for your book, Cold War and Love?
Well, basically, women, especially African-American women, because a lot of times women are like love stories, and this is a love story straight through. And then men like war stories. I hope I'm not being chauvinistic, but many men like stories, or they even been to war, and so they like that part of it. And then religious people like the story of faith, because it's also a story of faith and belief. So those three groups. But mainly I wrote it for women.
So really a book for everyone, but like you said, specifically for women.
Right, yeah. Mainly I had African American women in mind when I wrote the book, but then later I found out that men like when I have a Facebook page, and when I put some of the pictures of the hellfighters, I got a lot of response from men, but not from women.
Glenn?
Yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed your book. I finished reading it, and I'm surprised that you geared it primarily for women, because I think all three aspects that you spoke of were represented very well. And in addition to the psyche of the men and, their struggles, during segregation and discrimination, particularly, at home and at the war, I was amazed at how you were able to capture that dynamic. And I'm just wondering how you did so, if that's a fair question.
Sure it is. My grandfather was a very strong character, and so he used to tell my father a lot of stories, and of course they've been telling me, my father was telling me stories from the time I was a small kid. And then my son, Thomas, did a film about my father. It was just for the family, and asked me to interview him. And so I heard all of these stories put together, and that inspired me, and I knew my grandfather, and I think he died when I was 10 or 11, so I knew how strong he was. But I struggle with the woman's voice, because if a man is so strong, then he tends to overshadow the wife, my grandmother, Evie, but she was also strong in her own way.
Very much so, very much so. That's interesting, because, going back and forth, the way you did the book, from one person's perspective and then another, I think it's Albert and then Evie, if I have it correctly. Is it
right.
Albert?
Exactly,
I was really, you developed those characters so well. Obviously, you didn't develop them. They were, characterizations of your relatives. And her, her wisdom, her strength and fortitude, I really found to be encouraging, because I have daughters of my own, and the fact that she had so much of a responsibility for raising the family and being a wife at the same time and being a member of society, I really thought that she was an amazing woman, and I'm just great. Loved reading about her and hearing about her from her perspective.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as I said, I knew her very well, because she lived until I was about 22 years old. But as I said, I did have a little trouble with her, but I managed to really look into her more so.
Yes, that's fantastic. And, I'm as I said earlier, I know that I'm going to have questions that I didn't prepare you for, and, of course, I have one already. But you kind of referred to it before the conversation, the podcast. And that's, I read, of course, that you retired, but, as we jokingly talked a little earlier, I said that, well, you retired, but here you are writing a book. So can you talk a little bit about that? Why retire and then unretire and write a book, or how did that work?
Well, I've always been busy since I retired in 1997 from teaching. I followed my husband to South Africa. He was in exile here for many years. So when I went to South Africa, I did a lot, visited relatives and all kinds of things, and worked with people there. So then when he passed away and I came home, I took care of my mother for a year or so. And then I, did volunteer work. So I was always busy. It wasn't that I was actually sitting home, And then after after Thomas did the video, I think maybe a year or so later, he gave me the transcript from it. So when I read through, I said, this needs to be told. And it kept haunting me until I said, all right, let me just start this. And that's what I did. I started this, especially when I joined the Frederick Douglass group. We had to come in every week or every other week and read something. And so I would write. And I would read, and I listened to other people reading and got, notes from Grace. Excellent advice from her. And so that's how it went.
Grace Edwards, right.
Grace Edwards, yes.
Yeah, for some reason, and I guess it's just the energy in your voice, I really don't see you as a person that retires and sits at home in a rocking chair and, your knitting. You just don't seem, and of course I've never met you, but I can, from your voice, it sounds that you're not that kind of person.
Well, the other thing is that what I did is after my husband died, I would spend 6 months in South Africa and 6 months in New York City. So I was always rushing to get everything in wherever I was.
So how long did it take you to actually write the book from beginning to end, if that's a fair question?
I was hoping you didn't answer. You didn't ask that question. It's hard to answer because you write and then you take off, you do something else and you write. So probably I would say from 1912, 13, I was writing. And I finished it, and then it took another year or so to edit it because that's a tremendous job as well.
Yeah, yes, I could imagine. I've always wanted to do that, but it just seems so time-consuming. I'm sorry, Glenn, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I had a question about, and I guess it's something that I really it struck me when I read about. I believe it's your grandfather Albert when he enlisted. Was he the one that enlisted in World War I, or was?
Yes, my grandfather, right. He was 38 when he enlisted.
That's what I was going to say. The fact that he was 38 and enlisted, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's because the job and the employment situation in Albany wasn't so attractive where he could support his family as well. And could you talk a little bit about that part of it? Because I was wondering if you mentioned his motivation to do so.
Yes. Right. My grandfather was a stoker. And we talk about the title. You have the word coal, C-O-A-L, in the title. Was a miner. At 15, he went to the mines. Then he became a merchant marine, and then he joined up in 1900. He joined the Navy, and the only thing he could do was either work in the kitchen or work as a fireman shoveling coal. So again, for 4 years he shoveled coal. And then when he decided to marry, he and my grandmother decided to marry in 1909, and he moved to Albany because he thought things were cheaper there and he could get a factory job. The only job he could find was that of a stoker at the Capitol. So from 1909 until the war broke out, he was shoveling coal, and he realized he's not a young man anymore. He was middle-aged, or what he thought was middle-aged then. He said, he told my grandmother, if I go to war, they'll have to give me a better job when I return. And she said, "You must be crazy."
I remember that conversation.
Well, and Rudean, if my memory serves me correct, a stoker is just someone who shovels coal to stoke the fire, correct?
Absolutely. They had a big boiler there, and he had experience from the Navy, so they hired him to tend the boiler at the Capitol.
Oh, incredible. I'm sorry, Glenn, did I cut you off?
No, nothing. I mean, as we know with coal, there's so many health issues dealing with coal as well. It's not an attractive sort of a job, and he did what he had to do to support his family. And, I said that's something that I think goes unnoticed with our history, particularly, history of African Americans when it comes to supporting their family and keeping the family together. And I think that was what really impressed me, that the family stayed together and as a result was stronger, even though, there was times where, he and the wife disagreed, but not, a lot, but they did what they had to do to keep the family together. And I thought that's something that you really made a point of, and that's what's going to probably stick with me when I tell people about the book. Is that something that
he also worked on the weekends painting houses.
Yes,
so
that's
he was a hard worker.
Yes.
Busy man.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And another question I had was with regard to the 369th, because I'm from Harlem. As a matter of fact, I live 2 blocks away from the 369th Armory.
Right, all right.
That the young soldiers came to him for wisdom. Maybe you can tell Danny a little bit about that part of his career in the 369th Regiment in World War I.
Yeah,
Great
sure.
Point,
because remember, those guys, some were 18, some even lied about their age, and they could have even been 17.
Been younger, yeah.
and then maybe 20 and so forth. So when certain things happened, they had no control over. For example, when they went to France and they told them that they would be fighting under the French flag, they were loaned to the French, they were all upset. And even when they went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, when people were trying to kill them and whatever, they always would come to my grandfather to ask for advice. And he said, well, I'm a private just like you. But he would try to give them advice and just tell them to, cool it down. And so he would give advice, but he was saying he's on the same level. But they knew that he had been in the service before for 4 years, and they knew that he was an older person.
Right. Yeah, he saved a lot of them from disaster, too, from the book,
right.
too.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to take a minute and let our listeners know they're listening to the Danny Tisdale Show podcast. It's brought to you by Constant Contact. Constant Contact is an online marketing company that creates email marketing campaigns like a pro with easy-to-use features. We highly recommend using Constant Contact for all your email list building. Click the link below and sign up. You're listening to the Danny Tisdale Show on Harlem World Radio, and we're right back to our guests. And I, Rudean, wanted to ask you about the artwork on the cover. And listeners, I just want to let you know that you'll be able to purchase the book with the link that we'll provide within the show, so you won't be able to hesitate and take advantage of it. But Rudean, I wanted to ask you about the cover on the art on the book. Is that an actual cover of your grandparents, or is it a mock-up?
No, it's a U.S. Army recruitment poster put out in 1918. The fact that I got hold of that was like a miracle because
I can imagine.
My sister-in-law said, she knew I was writing this book, and I was telling her a little bit about it. She said, well, I have a poster of a soldier. I said, let me just see it, and I was so shocked when I saw it. I said, this is absolutely incredible. So my son Lyle, he's a photographer. He took a picture of it, and then I'm just going to use this on the cover because this shows everything that I really want to say. The wife saying goodbye, or the girlfriend saying goodbye, the soldier saying goodbye, and then the others off to war.
Yeah, I love it for that very reason that, as soon as I looked at it, it's like, I kind of got the story. It's like it's this love story of, two people who are definitely in love. And, here we are at that moment as, he goes off to war. So it definitely helped tell the story. I think it's perfect for the cover.
It is the reason I said it was a miracle because she was about to sell it to an antique dealer for $50, and so when I saw it, I said, no, cancel that sale.
Right now, exactly. 1918, that's amazing. It looks like it's in pretty good condition.
Yeah. I have another question for you, Rudean. Either firsthand or while the interviews were going, I'm always interested in Harlem, all things Harlem, as Danny is. Was there any indication about the people of Harlem, as his friends, or his perspective on Harlem, or his opinion of the people in Harlem that you can think of offhand with regard to, particularly the 369, since many of them were from that area?
Yeah, well, most of the men were from Harlem. Exactly. Right. And one's father was a barber, and other people, they had their own professions, whatever. But he lived in Harlem first, and then when he married my grandmother, I said they moved to Albany because they thought it would be cheaper there. But he loved Harlem. He frequented the bars in Harlem. And he knew the men and whatnot and so forth.
Interesting. Because I
was actually born in Harlem. I spent my first 7 years there.
Oh, where'd you live?
Don't ask. Morningside Avenue, I believe.
Okay.
And I've been going to church in Harlem since I've been a young person. Bethel AME Church, 132nd Street, between Lennox. That's where my father and mother met.
Oh, okay. I do remember that. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm sorry, Glenn. I thought you were going to follow
up.
No,
go ahead, Danny. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious, Rudean. Is you know, you are writing the book at a mature age, and there's going to be some of our listeners out there who are, you know, listening to your story. And I always say, which is why I love the podcast and I love publishing, that everyone has a story. What would you suggest to someone who wants to, you know, follow in your footsteps, and maybe they're retired, maybe they're not, but they have a story to tell? What do you suggest that they do?
Well, first of all, decide you're going to write the story. You're going to tell the story. Outline it, whatever. And then one of the most important things is to, you know, maybe go to a writing class or look online. There are so many different articles and whatnot about writing. So you write your first draft, and then it's very important to have it edited. You don't want to have any mistakes in it. So, as I said, write your story. That's the whole thing. Decide you're going to write it.
And had you heard about the Harlem Writers Guild and Grace Edwards, and then you contacted them, or had you known her previously? No,
I just saw an ad, or someone told me about this writing class down on 96th Street. And so I said, I'd like to sign up for that. Unfortunately, that organization that was sponsoring that doesn't exist anymore. So when they went out of business, we would meet. That's where I met Grace Edwards, and she was just so amazing and so welcoming. And so then when that organization, I don't remember the name of it, that was sponsoring that writing class, I think I took it two terms there. And then we would meet. After that, we would meet at her house in Brooklyn, or we would meet at different houses. They met at my house in the Bronx, and my son's house in Manhattan, and different places. But we just kept it going.
You know, I wanted to interject, you know, the whole idea of when the 369th came back from the war, and it was, you know, from what people say was the beginning of the era of the new Negro, for lack of a better term. I really want to admire you the way you characterize your dad, and how when he said that they're going to have to treat us differently, he actually did come back, and he got a much better job, at least from a status standpoint.
My granddad.
Your granddad. I'm sorry, my apologies.
Right.
And with regard to, you know, we fought in the war. We were heroes. We helped win the war, and when they came back, knowing despite the pushback they were going to get to become, you know, real citizens, there were those who actually did make themselves, you know, more attractive to as regard to, you know, moving up in the world, as opposed to having to go back to menial sort of things where people who didn't have any skills, that sort of thing. So I just wanted, it's not a question, but I think the fact that your dad was a model, and I hate to just put in a term like the new Negro, the fact that when he came back he had a job with responsibility and more status. And I think it was very encouraging when I read that part. And again, it's not a question, but it's just a statement. I'm glad you really highlighted that in the book.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that my grandfather was a self-educated man, so he made the best of what he could. His father took him out of school when he was 11 to take care of the rest of the kids. And so he was always bitter about that until he went to war and he faced death, and he let that go. But he educated himself, read the newspapers, had discussions, and that kind of thing. So that was important to me as well.
So, Rudean, was that something that...
I'm sorry, Danny, go ahead. No, in addition, he wanted to ensure that his children did better than him, which is something that, you know, that is something that, you know, we understand, but people don't know that it's a given for us that we want our next generations to do better than we did. And I think you personified that with your grandfather.
Yeah, well, he would always tell my father from the time my father was like 7 years old, I want you to go to college. I didn't have the chance to get an education, but I want you to go. He would say, I don't know how you're going to get there, but I want you to go to college. That's and he kept that dream all the way through high school and through my father's going to high school and whatever. And I don't want to give it away, but
no, don't. Okay,
don't.
The dream.
Well, Glenn, that was pretty much the question I was going to ask, Rudean, and you beat me to it. And we're at that moment where we're at our last 4 or 5 minutes here. And I have a couple of more questions for you, and I know Glenn has probably the same, so which means we probably have about one question each. So
you go ahead, Danny. You go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Rudean, what advice do you have for someone out there listening who, has challenges? They may even want to teach. They may want to write a book. Do you just have any well-wishing, great advice for listeners out there who, whether it's writing a book or wanting to teach or whatever it is in their life of some positive advice for them?
Yes, of course. First of all, I advise them to hold on to their dream because they're going to face obstacles. This is the world, and especially in today's climate. So just keep your dream in mind. You might have to tweak it a bit, and you might have to go around it a bit, but just keep that dream in mind. That's very important. And as my dad did, think before you act. Don't, go off on a tangent or get angry with someone or whatever. Think about what you're going to do. And then the third thing is doing the best you can because that's going to pay off. He did the best he could, and it really paid off for his children. So, and he gained the respect of 5 governors. So I think that those are the 3 things that I would mention, And also being creative from my grandmother. Stop for a while and think. Think about being creative and doing the things that you enjoy.
Your grandmother was very talented.
Very wise. I'm sorry, Glenn. Go ahead.
No, I was saying I'm not going to give everything away, but yes, that's definitely comes through in the book, and I hope more people could read the book. It's an excellent piece of literature.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And Rudean, we're at our last couple of minutes, and I just wanted to, if possible, you to give information on how our readers can stay in contact with you. If you have a Facebook page or your website, as I said before, we're going to post the information about the book on our website and link it to Amazon. Can you give information so our readers can stay in contact with you and engage with your story?
I'd love for them to get in contact with me. The best way is to go to my website, which is www.tulipbudpress.com. It's a flower, press.com. And they can get a free chapter of chapter 1 there. And on that same,
I didn't know that.
That same website, my email address is there, rudeanleinaeng@gmail.com. So they can get that. They can contact me there, and they can get that from the website. And then the book is available on Amazon.com and also on store.bookbaby.com. But all that information is on the website because it's hard for a person to write all that down. So I suggest going to the website. And I'd love to hear.
And
I'd love him to read the free chapter. That's the first chapter where my grandfather finds his dream woman.
The juicy part. And folks, we are going to again link the tulipbudpress.com link on the post and also to purchase the book. I'm sorry, Glenn, did you have something to say?
No, I said they'll like the first chapter. I guarantee you.
Well, thank you so much. We're at our last 30 seconds. I want to thank Rudean for being on the show and sharing with us this incredible Harlem story, American story, and it's really an international story. And thank you, Glenn, for being on the show also. Thank you.
Thank you.
and wish you the best.
Both of you.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure. Bye-bye now.
Well, folks, this is Harlem, and these are Harlem stories that we love to tell and share. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.